You might have heard on the news about a controversy involving comfort women.
Here's what you need to know about it.
So recently, across the media, there have been a lot of articles published about comfort women.
Right.
And if you haven't been following very closely, you might have seen Japan being quoted and people from Korea being quoted, talks about World War II and about large sums being thrown around. You might not understand the history of it because it's not something that's commonly talked about in the U.S. for good reasons, I assume, since we weren't intimately involved in it. But we want to catch you up on the history of what comfort women are and why this is something that's being talked about right now at the end of 2015. So buckle up. This history is a little bit involved and also extremely dark.
Right.
But we want you to know about it. During Japan's imperial wars in Asia, during the run-up to World War II and during World War II, it forced thousands of girls and women to become sex slaves for Japanese troops. It called these girls and women, many of whom were Korean, comfort women. Now, originally, Japan recruited comfort women from Korean communities, both in Japan and in Korea itself. So some did actually come from Japan and then were brought over to the areas that were being invaded, and some were from those areas originally. It used Korean police to recruit the women and girls, and would often lure them with false promises of a good job in the city. The women were then shipped to military bases, often near the front lines in China, where they were locked up in rooms only 3 by 5 feet and raped by as many as 60 to 70 soldiers every day. So you see immediately that the term comfort women is perhaps the worst euphemism ever.
Right.
Because they were literally used to comfort the soldiers by allowing them to be raped many times per day. We have quotes from some of the people who were there at the time. This is Chong Ok-sun, who says, "We had to serve over 5,000 Japanese soldiers as sex slaves every day, up to 40 men per day. Each time I protested, they hit me or stuffed rags in my mouth. One held a matchstick to my private parts until I obeyed him. One Korean girl caught a venereal disease from being raped so often, and as a result, over 50 Japanese soldiers were infected. In order to stop the disease from spreading and to sterilize the Korean girl, they stuck a hot iron bar in her private parts." For some reason blaming her for the fact that one of the soldiers that was raping her gave her a venereal disease. We also have a report from the time saying that a girl had bitten one of the soldiers trying to rape her. So they brought the girl out in front of the other comfort girls and soldiers and cut her head off with a sword. And this
obviously that seems, just totally egregious and horrible and horrendous. And then if you even read some of the more benign anecdotes from that, they're still
just the stats,
absolutely horrendous. I read one this morning about a woman who said by the end of the day she couldn't walk, and she's still facing extreme physical pain and physical repercussions from when she was younger in this situation. It's just
Yeah, because obviously it's been a very long time since that period, but there are still both women who were raped as comfort women and some soldiers who lived at the time who are still alive. That's one of the reasons that it's still being discussed. Another reason is that for decades and decades and decades, there was no resolution for that and for some of the other things that Japan did in that region. I mean, look, it was obviously an incredibly horrendous war with war crimes being committed by all sides, but this is perhaps one of the most horrendous ones, especially because there was no resolution at the time. Now, after World War II, the U.S. and other Western powers went into the region and held some criminal tribunals for various issues, but this wasn't one of the issues that was resolved. Now, back in the 90s, Japan actually did give a formal apology for it, but that seemed to actually cause more problems than it solved because there was a number of people in Japan who didn't like the idea that they had done this, didn't like it being talked about openly, and so sort of attacked it as a myth or being trumped up. And so now we have some, I guess, more material resolution. Japan's foreign minister Fumio Kishida said his government will give 1 billion yen to a fund to help those who suffered, which is certainly a good gesture. It does not seem like a large amount of money.
No, it
considering
seems like
the crimes.
a very, very small amount of money.
Now, I have to imagine there are very few women still alive from the time, but that's what one person in a court case in America gets that. Obviously, we have a very different judicial system than they have in Japan. Now, to go along with the money, the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, expressed anew his most sincere apologies and remorse to all the women who underwent immeasurable and painful experiences and suffered incurable physical and psychological wounds as comfort women. And there was a response from the South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se, who said that as long as Tokyo sticks to its side of the deal, Seoul will consider the issue irreversibly resolved. And so, a very dark page from the history of the region. And this is some sort of resolution, I suppose.
I don't think it is. I mean, obviously,
well, what should they do?
I mean, it's being addressed, first of all, 60 years later? 70 years later?
Yeah, 70 years.
I mean, that's ridiculous. It should have been, I think, addressed at least. And I know Japan has a different culture and they approach, sensitive matters like this differently. But even the fact that we're still calling them comfort women, like these were sex slaves. They were raped constantly. Even the fact
that term is used as well.
I understand, but even though I can scroll through my news feed and read about comfort women, the average reader could not, see that and not even think twice about it and keep scrolling. I get that,
God.
but I feel like they should be Japan addressing sex slaves from World War II. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like there's different ways to approach it that validates what these women went through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrendous. And $8.3 million, I mean, yeah, for you and I, that's a lot of money, but for to make up for the damages that these women had to deal with, and for their families and the psychological impact
for the families.
that even had on them, it's just
I mean, one of the sort of consequences of this having been 70 plus years ago is, as I said, there's probably very few of the women still alive or the soldiers still alive, and the women that are alive are 80 or 90 plus years old, obviously. And we have to bear in mind that the politicians on both sides who are addressing this issue now, the vast majority of them probably hadn't even been born at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But look, you can go to various parts of the globe and find issues similar to this in scale and scope that have never been resolved. I mean,
I know.
Even in America's history, obviously, the crime of slavery and all of that there's never really been any resolution to that, and not to mention the decades and decades of political and judicial persecution of African Americans even after it was ended.
I just don't understand in these cases. I don't understand why if you go to war, rape is one of the quintessential things that is part of the fight.
Well, I think that
I just think
at some
that's
point,
just,
if you're killing people,
sick human.
I think at some point when you're killing people regularly and committing war crimes and executing prisoners and things like that, that probably doesn't seem like that bad of a crime when that is the life that you're living day to day. And also, I think it's, to some extent, I'm not saying in this area, but in some, with child soldiers in Africa, they have them do these sorts of things to make them feel like they've crossed some sort of threshold where now these are the only people that will understand me because we've done these terrible things together, and so it sort of bonds them in a way. Yeah. It's obviously very... No, I don't like it either. And so I'm glad that they've done at least something to resolve the issue. I don't know how much this is actually going to do to make the women living in Japan or the women still living in Korea or their families feel much better about the situation.
Yeah.
But this is what we have right now, and hopefully this will prepare you to talk about the issue, to read more about the issue as it continues to develop. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next video.